Okay, I think everybody heard that the conference is being recorded. Again, let you know that we had a minor snafu, so you might need to log back in to the slides in order to see the slides as we advance them. It looks like everybody who was on the phone is still on the phone, but if you need to, you can log back in to the visual portion. To go ahead and get started, welcome this morning to our latest in a series of webinars that we're presenting for ESOP companies in Ohio and beyond. It's part of our webinar series. My name is Chris Cooper. I'm with the Ohio Employee Ownership Center at Kent State University here in beautiful Kent, Ohio, where the weather is just gorgeous today. So we are enjoying that. Our speaker today here, he's actually from Napa, California, but he is in Ohio on business, so he's presenting the webinar from lovely Ohio, and we're glad that we could at least approximate the Napa weather for him as he came in today.
Yeah, wonderful, Chris. Great day.
Yeah, indeed. So I think without further ado, I will turn it over to David. Real quickly, just want to let everyone know the apologies about the little snafu we had with the technology. And so David's going to be telling me when to advance the slides. So just give everyone a heads up that you might be hearing those prompts as we go through the presentation today. Now I will turn it over to you, David.
Thanks a lot, Chris, and I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with everyone today about one of my favorite subjects, which is after you've gone through the process of creating an employee-owned company through the form of an ESOP, how does your ESOP support your business plan? So, Chris, if we could start with the overview slide, that'd be great. And I'm going along with my own PowerPoint here and not logged in at this point.
Okay, it's up there.
So the things we're going to try to accomplish in the next 45 minutes are to talk about employee ownership culture in general, a little bit about employee demographics and how that relates to employee ownership culture, and focus a lot on the concept of economic incentive in order to accomplish something really positive with broad-based employee ownership through the use of an ESOP in terms of supporting your business plan. There's got to be a connection between what you learn about how the company operates and how you can contribute to how the company operates and what the financial reward is for you as an employee down the road, not only individually, but as a group of employees. And then we'll talk a little bit about communications, the complexities to communications, and conclude with some remarks at the end. Like any well-run ESOP company or employee-owned company, as Chris and I were talking about earlier today, it'd be great if you had some questions you wanted to share. I won't see them on the program here, but Chris, you'll certainly share them with me, and I can address questions that might address your needs specifically. So if we could go to the slide 2 on employee ownership culture, Chris, thank you.
Okay.
Basically, what we're doing when we talk about employee ownership culture, and again, there's been many studies done by the Ohio Employee Ownership Center, Rutgers University, Joseph Blasi has done a number of studies, but most of them focus on, and I will tell you my own study after working with employee-owned companies for over 30 years, is that you've got to combine broad-based employee ownership with an effective employee ownership culture in order to really achieve the maximum that you can out of your ESOP and have it support your business plan. If you don't invest the same amount of time in employee communication and employee ownership culture that you did in creating the ESOP in the first place, which, as everyone knows, can take 3, 4, 6 months, sometimes longer, then you will not achieve any real success, in my opinion, in having your ESOP plan support your business plan. So what we talk about when we're focusing on the concept of employee ownership culture is we're trying to create a corporate environment that would foster and provide for employee ownership and allows employees to have a direct financial interest in the success of the business plan. That's what they get with the ESOP, broad-based employee ownership, a piece of the pie, and then hopefully what happens is that we can educate the employees that they know enough about the way the business operates to add value at their own level at the company. There's no requirement that everyone doesn't have to be the CEO, everyone doesn't have to be the president, everyone doesn't have to be the CFO, you don't have to be the chief operating officer. Everyone at a company can add value to this process of creating the employee ownership culture and improving the processes of the corporation, which will in turn improve the revenues, hopefully, and control the expenses, which will result in greater fair market value. Greater fair market value translates into greater employee ownership financial incentives for the broad-based employee ownership plan. And that's essentially the concept of employee ownership. And there's no one correct way to do it. There are dozens of ways to do it. I have clients who we work with who will ask us to give them some communications tools, and then they'll take the program and run with it. I have clients who actually want to hire and retain a professional to come in and develop a program and then train the trainers at the company. And I have clients who just, essentially do it themselves and get a little bit of information, go participate in programs like this, and then create the ownership structure. I recently had a client, a small, closely held business that it was about 50 employees, and it had created 100%, or actually I think it was a 30% owned ESOP company. They downloaded the Jack Stacks program on the Greater Game of Business. They created their own Greater Game of Business at the company, and each month when they ran the game, both as a game and also as a part of the business, to the extent that they achieved profits of some kind, there was a financial reward that the 70% owner, who was the founder of the company, shared with the employees. That worked remarkably well to get people actively involved in creating the employee ownership culture right away. One of the things that happens in ESOP companies is that an ESOP is generally a long-term incentive plan. So it's good to try to develop some short-term incentives for employees. You can do that through bonuses, broad-based bonuses that go out to everyone. We've had some companies that just create a dividend program so that to the extent that the company has profits and there's some extra left over, the dividends are based upon employee ownership at the company, and it's that current incentive prior to retirement, death, disability, or termination after being vested is something that can create and foster an employee ownership culture in a really nice way. If we could move to slide 3, talking about employee demographics and defining objectives, Chris, thank you.
Okay, I have a quick question for you, David. I think the research, you mentioned research a few minutes ago. Doesn't the research show that the ESOP companies, even though an ESOP is a long-term benefit plan, isn't there a higher likelihood that ESOP companies will also have those other short-term?
Yeah, that's a really good question and a good point, Chris. And that's both the formal studies that you reference and the ones that I referenced, and I'm sure that the center has been involved in as well in coordination with other entities. Both the formal studies and my own experience after working with hundreds of ESOP companies for 30 years is that if you look at an employee-owned company through an ESOP, either a 30%, 60%, or 100%, you're going to see generally greater retirement benefits, substantially greater retirement benefits provided, as well as most likely greater compensation levels and greater financial incentives like bonuses and ESOP dividends, as I've talked about. So I agree wholeheartedly with that. Both the studies show that and my own personal experience has demonstrated that, Chris. Really good point. And I think that kind of environment is what starts the ESOP in the first place, because the owners in the first place really want to share equity and incentives, short-term incentives with the employees. That's why they're creating the ESOP in the first place. It's a mechanism for the owners to essentially transition their business to the next generation of employees, and they want it to work. They want to provide the transfer of value to the next generation, and the best way to do that is to create financial incentives that are tied to performance, and not just tied to one individual's performance, but hopefully you create goals that are company-wide goals. If the company-wide goals are hit, then there's extra profits to share, and that's where the short-term incentives come from. In addition to, if you get profits, you get increased value in the business, and that increases people's long-term equity incentives to the ESOP. So focusing on, and please continue to jump in with questions, Chris and others. It's great to focus on what people want to hear as opposed to just my PowerPoint slides.
Actually, to that point, we got a question in from Barry asking us to name the studies so we can read them. I think instead of us taking time at the webinar, what we'll do is I'll send out a follow-up email to the participants with some links to the studies that we're referencing, and I'll CC you, David, on that as well, so you can add any studies that you're aware of that we can send out to people.
Great. And Chris, I will follow on after that with the specific ones that I'm aware of, and they are all consistently demonstrate that ESOP companies tend to pay their employees better, they tend to make more money, and they tend to have better retirement benefits, and the values of those businesses grow as well.
Right.
So that's great, Chris. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
So skipping over to employee demographics and kind of defining our objectives. The first thing you have to do is you have to consider your audience. That's what I mean by employee demographics. You have to evaluate who you're talking with and how you might communicate with an engineering company or an architectural company or in a company with professional employees relative to a manufacturing company with line employees and others. If you've got a transportation company, there may be an entirely different style of communication because, for example, if you've got a trucking company, there's people that are going to be on the road and aren't going to be in the office all the time. You've got to come up with a program that works for your audience. I've got one client who we've got home health care workers. We've got pizza preparation and delivery companies. Well, one of my favorite employee communication programs that's ever been developed is by the pizza company, and it really gets right down to the line, to the people who are driving the pizzas out and delivering them, to the people who are preparing the pizzas. And I think you have to think about your audience, think about what's going to sell well to that audience, what they're going to understand, and at what level of communication you want to make the program. You define that at the outset. I think another thing to do is, in addition to knowing your audience, is making sure that you have someone who's making the presentation that can connect with that audience. Secondly, you got to decide what your message is. If you're going to try to educate, I don't think you want to start from scratch to try to educate all of your employees about the strategic business plan that the company's developed. I think you should take small steps. I think taking small steps to help people understand that there's three basic components to financial performance. You've got revenues, you've got expenses, and then you've got profits, and explain to them how the profits turn into value. If that's a simple message that you can start at the beginning. It's not complicated. And then as you grow as an ESOP company and in your communications efforts, you can build in greater programs about controlling specific expenses, focusing on cost of goods sold, how the company creates its products and how they sell them and how much it costs to sell them and who all in the company is involved in selling them and how you can cut the costs of selling those products and increase the profits. But I think you walk before you run. Simple messages, teach employees about the basic finances of a company, revenues, expenses, profits, and value, and then go on from there. I've got many clients who share broad level financial statements. That's the next thing. If you're going to try to communicate some financial concepts to employees and you don't share financial information, I think you're not going to be as successful in getting the message across. Next thing I think you need to think about when you're talking about defining your objectives, looking at your demographics, are there language barriers? You know, we have many multicultural workforces now. You know, we work throughout the country. We've got clients in the East Coast. We've got them in the Midwest and on the West Coast. We have a tremendous amount of Hispanic populated companies. You're going to have to bring in some interpreters in some cases to try to help you get the message across to your workforce. And you know, Spanish is one language. There are many languages that you're going to have to deal with these days with the various different multicultural workforces that are involved in companies throughout the country. And another way that I've seen companies start and work through the process of employee communications and having their ESOP plan support your business plan is through intranet and or email processes. A lot of times it makes sense to create some simple ESOP communications at the outset of your ESOP and your employee-owned program to answer basic frequently asked questions. As you develop, you put that on the intranet. You solicit a mechanism to get emails and questions through the intranet. You collect a database of the answers to those questions. You improve the frequently asked questions with those results over a period of time. And I think that's a really effective, simple, inexpensive way to communicate the message about employee ownership and how the ESOP plan can support the business plan to your employees. If we could move on, Chris, to the next slide, that'd be great.
Okay.
What are our moving on to defining those objectives a little bit more clearly. Most of what I've been talking about today relates to aligning management's interests with the shareholders. Management's interests, employees' interests, and the shareholders' interests together. And at the outset of your ESOP, you may be a 30% ESOP with a 70% founding shareholder. You may be a mature ESOP with 60% ESOP ownership and 40% non-ESOP ownership. You may be a 100% ESOP-owned company. But what you really want to do to achieve success in having your ESOP plan support your business is to align management's interest, the employee's interest, and shareholders together. And the best way to do that is to have shared incentives, in my opinion, based upon company goals that are achieved, company financial goals that are achieved of profitability. And share that not just at the end of the ESOP's life when someone retires, becomes disabled and needs the benefit, or it's terminated, invested, but do that during the course of employee ownership as you grow the business. That will hopefully motivate employees' performance during the course of the life of the ESOP. And also what I think we want to do, just like we're trying to do this morning, you want to get people involved. You want to solicit questions. You want to encourage employee engagement. Rather than simply have the professionals help you create the program, get some ideas from the professionals, get some professional help on this subject matter, and then solicit a team of people. One of the things that we have focused on is to create an employee ownership committee at the company. It's distinguished from your ERISA fiduciary committee. It's not the committee that does all the work on fiduciary responsibilities and handling, buying and selling the ESOP stock, accomplishing the purchase, doing the valuation, and the record keeping. No, this is a communications committee. And that committee should consist of, and whether or not you're a 10 or 15 employee company or 100 or 200 or 300 or 500 employee company, you should involve employees at all levels of the company in order to engage them in the process. And so you might want to pick an executive level employee to be on that ESOP communications committee. You might want to pick if you're in a manufacturing company, you might want to pick a couple of machine operators to be on the committee. You might want to pick a HR person to be on the committee. You might want to pick the receptionist if you've got a reception office. Create a broad-based employee ownership committee that helps you involve and engage the employees in the process, and then they can help you create these meaningful incentives. It's not that they're going to make the ultimate decision, but they're going to give you ideas as a management of an ESOP company that can be used to engage the people in the process and motivate them with their knowledge and with the financial incentives that come with that knowledge. Interbusiness, as I said, teamwork and interbusiness collaboration is the key, getting everybody involved. One of the things I talked about, the Jack Stack program that one of my clients had implemented right after the Great Game of Business, right after they had created the ESOP. Allow employees to be involved in taking considered risks. Let them understand. A lot of times what happens with ESOP companies is there's not enough education about the downside of ESOPs and employee ownership. The downside is that, you get a downturn in the market and the value of the stock may drop. So it's not always good. There are tough times with every company financially. There are challenging times. And sometimes you have to take risks. Sometimes there are risks and rewards associated with employee ownership. And if you take a risk, the risks may be large, but it may also create financial incentives for the company. Helping employees understand the risks of doing business and then the rewards of accomplishing, getting through that risk and surpassing the risk and the challenge that's in front of them will result in some real education and some real benefits in your employee communications program, and it will help the ESOP plan support your business plan. The other thing we want to do, I think, with our ESOP communications program in order to help the ESOP plan support the business plan is we want to attract and retain key talent that understands our employee ownership culture, understand that we're creating financial incentives that are going to hopefully achieve success for the business itself, which improve the profits of the company and then in turn the fair market value of the company for all employees. So HR, when you're out there attracting and retaining key talent, should be focused on educating employees about the ESOP at the first step of the game, at the recruiting stage. Finally, I'd say on defining objectives, don't get too complicated. Make your program simple to understand. Make it, like I said, if you start with 4 basic things: revenues, expenses, profits, and value growth, I think that's a good starting point. You can grow from there into a comprehensive review of various aspects of the financial performance of the company, and then you can grow into sharing parts of that financial performance as well as the strategic plan with the employees, but start small and grow into the greater stages that we're talking about here. So
I'm just going to make a quick comment. One of the things we see a lot, David, is that companies, they present information, but they don't necessarily look at are the people they're presenting it to going to be able to understand it? Is it a question of terminology? Have they provided enough education to make it meaningful? Have they been too complex? Like you said, simple to understand. Is the information you're providing accurate, but is it impossible for someone who's not necessarily a CFO or an accountant to understand? Well, it's really important that you bring it down. Again, that sounds, I guess that sounds a little bit worse than I intended to, but you want to make it understandable to the average person who doesn't deal with who may not deal with financial numbers on a daily basis.
That's a good point, Chris, and most people don't. I mean, most people need help preparing their tax returns. Most people, aren't spending a bunch of time figuring out exactly what finances of a business are for the business that they work for. They understand their particular job, their area of expertise, and I think that's another thing, Chris. In addition to being simple to understand, go to that level, that employee, whatever their job is. If they're the receptionist, if they're the pizza delivery guy, if they're a person, if they're the person in shipping who puts the goods on the truck that then goes out the door and delivers the goods to customers, whoever it may be, target the simple message, the education message, to something that will make sense for that person, and how that particular person at that particular level of the company can improve their performance so that it improves the overall profit picture at the company. I think that's where you keep it simple. And if you go to somebody, and you could go to a group of people in shipping, or a group of people in packing, group of people in transportation, a group of people in sales, and you can have separate meetings with those various different aspects of your company and have them tell you what they want to learn about your business. That's a good starting point as well.
Yeah, it's often not conceptual. I mean, they can understand, people understand the conceptual ideas behind it. They just may not know the terminology, for example.
Exactly. Exactly. And then maybe create a glossary of terms,
Right.
That's what we've seen too. That we add that to the frequently asked questions, and then a glossary of terms is something that people can help develop over time. And they don't have to be fancy words. They can be simple concepts that people can learn over time. And we add another one every week or another one every month.
Right.
I'm going to jump down to communications efforts, specifically the slide number 5 there, Chris.
Okay, I just clicked it on, but we did get another question in from a chat message from a participant. The question is, should the incentives be based on company results or down to the division or branch level?
My preference, just generally speaking, but I don't think there's one size fits all. My preference is company-wide. I think that tends to create shared responsibility, shared goals, and shared profits. However, it may work in a particular situation to use division performance. And another one kind of on that same line is, let's say you have you're a larger company and you have divisions in 6 different geographic parts of the state or 6 different geographic parts of the country. To me, I think the overall objective should be to bring that performance together for the company as a whole. I think it sells better. I think if you start creating divisional goals and rewards, then it doesn't really send the message the same way that I talked about, that we're trying to improve the profits of the company for the benefit of all of the employees at the company. But, there may be a circumstance in which targeted to a division makes sense because you need to make some changes at the division that make it a greater part of the profitability of the company. So I'm not going to say one size fits all, but I generally favor company-wide incentives. And I also, on top of that, I think it shouldn't be just, this is my personal opinion, I don't think it should be just individual goals, because that you deal on when you're dealing with bonuses and what one individual employee makes as salary. Those are issues that need to be handled separately, in my opinion. When we're talking about employee ownership and trying to have your ESOP plan support your strategic plan or your business plan, I think we want to create company-wide goals that allow us to improve the profits of the business and in turn the fair market value of the company, and that sells really well and creates a team effort to achieve those objectives. And so, good question, Chris, again.
Okay.
And not
questions coming.
Another one?
No, I was just going to say keep the questions coming to the participants.
Yeah, exactly. And again, the answers are just my experience and what I've learned from working with hundreds of ESOP companies over 30 years and what I've studied. There's not one size fits all. That's the thing I love about employee ownership is you see a lot of different programs created in different companies that work totally different. So it may be that division-wide goals are appropriate under certain circumstances. Communication efforts, combining them with the incentive, that's the key in my opinion. If you just have broad-based employee ownership and you have no communications efforts, I think you're missing the boat entirely. You're going to miss an opportunity to really get a lot of value out of your ESOP. Secondly, if you have an ESOP, broad-based employee ownership and communications efforts, but you don't give any economic incentive to the employees as a result of that, other than the value increase. And I'm not making light of the value increase. The value increase is what allows people to retire. I mean, we've been involved in hundreds of companies throughout this country. I believe we probably had more than $1 billion distributed to employees through the ESOPs that I've participated in creating, forming, assisting, and growing over the years. And that's great to create that value for your employees on an annual basis as you make distributions and through retirement years. But I really think you need to tie, once you've got broad-based employee ownership and a good communications program in place that's going to tie your ESOP plan to your corporate business objectives, then you have to provide some economic incentive. And it doesn't have to be dramatic, but it has to be something. And it's got to have the potential for being meaningful. If it can be meaningful and it can change people's lives in a financial way, that will assist you in achieving your business goals, your strategic business goals through the ESOP. In this slide, we also talk about knowing the strategic plan. I think that's in stage, we've got 101. 101 is understanding revenues, expenses, controlling expenses, profits, and value. After that, I think we go into the various aspects of the financial statements of a company, and ultimately, I think it makes sense to think about sharing part or all of your strategic plan with employees, but that's something that happens over time. It doesn't happen overnight. And then you can get employees invested in that strategic plan, and you can have an employee retreat on the strategic plan. You can have different segments of the company make presentations about how they can improve, how they can tie better their efforts to the strategic plan of the company and grow the profits and value of the business. That's a long-term goal. That's not a short-term goal with ESOP communication efforts that are intended to support your business plan. I'll jump down to complexity relating to communications for a minute, Chris. As I've been kind of explaining throughout this presentation, the company's goals and the employees' in general, their achievement of those goals is reflected in the profit or loss of the business. If there's a loss, the value of the company, generally speaking, is going to decline. If there's a profit, the value of the company tends to grow. And that's another thing I think people should be communicating to their employees. Generally speaking, a company's value is determined on what's called a Gordon growth model. So if you have, let's say, $100,000 of profits each year, you could look at a level of a multiple of earnings. Let's call that your earnings or profits. And let's say you multiply that times 4, and that may be the multiple of earnings that establishes the fair market value of that particular company, depending upon its industry, size, revenue growth, sales growth, profits, etc. So I think another thing to explain to employees is there is this multiplier effect. So if you make $100,000, it doesn't mean you're worth $100,000. You're probably worth your company's probably worth some multiple of that $100,000 or $1 million of profits. That's another simple message, I think, to communicate to employees is because if they see that if I earn $10, $1, $100, that increases the value by 3, 4, or 5 times that amount of profits that I earn. That's the next bullet here is what I was kind of alluding to earlier. There may be circumstances where you're doing everything you can, and your particular division or your particular aspect of the company is performing quite well. But there are economic troubles in general that have an impact on your company. For example, the general economy. If we see a downturn in the stock market, that changes people's minds about how business is and spending, etc. Exchange rates. You may do business overseas, and you may be doing business in the pound, the British sterling pound, or the euro, and or the dollar may decline relative to the British sterling pound or the euro, and that impacts your profits. That's another area where I don't think that's ESOP Communications 101, but if you're in an international business and you do have exchange rates that impact your business, we had one company who was in the shoe business that created a large distribution company involving ESOPs about 20 years ago, and it was integrated in the German market. And when the German Deutschmark was growing relative to the dollar, the profits of that U.S. Company would be adversely affected dramatically. There's nothing that the employees could do to change that, but the employees needed to understand how that impacted their profits, and I think that's incumbent upon the company to include something like that in their communications efforts. There may be other factors, interest rates. You may be a company that's actively involved in manufacturing, and interest rates rise, and the value of buying equipment and putting manufacturing equipment in, that it's more expensive, so that impacts your value. If we could jump down to the next slide, Chris, number 7, that'd be good.
Okay.
The next thing I caution everybody on is to making projections about the future. Let's say that you have something that looks like a hockey stick, and your growth has been growing. The value of stock's been growing from $1 to $2 to $3 per share over the years, and it's been pretty consistent. I think it's really critical in your communications program to explain that the value of a company may increase and it may decrease, and that's the rights and responsibilities of employee ownership. You don't just get a right. You don't just get a benefit. It's not some God-given right to have increase in fair market value of the stock of an ESOP company. It depends upon the performance of the business, and I think it's really critical to communicate that to employees so that they understand how profits work, how value works, and that there's not a guarantee of success. We can jump down to the next one here, if you don't mind, slide 8, Chris.
Yep.
So here's just a little example of things that you may decide to communicate to your employees, in addition to some of the other things we've been talking about today. Purchase price, or fair market value history. You might want to demonstrate that trend. You might want to also demonstrate what it takes to continue to achieve that trend. You might want to demonstrate what happens if certain financial circumstances exist at the company and the trend would decline for some reason, why it would decline. I think that's a nice pictorial that would be really helpful. That is one thing that you can include in your program. Another thing I think you can include in your program, in addition to just the basic profits or sales, expenses, profits, value, is ESOP distributions and diversification elections. If we've got a history of making $500,000 or $1 million worth of ESOP distributions each year and $250,000 worth of diversification elections each year, then I think it's something to share. It's something to trumpet to your employees and explain. What it also does for the employees is it explains to them the cost of employee ownership. So you may make $2 million of profits, but you got to distribute $1 million of those profits to terminated vested participants in order to make a market for your stock. Employees need to understand that in order to understand how the ESOP plan can help drive the business goals of the company. And then another one I don't have on here, but the debt of the company. If there's long-term debt, how that long-term debt is going to be retired. If there's short-term debt, what's our working capital line of credit? What assets secure that working capital line of credit? When do we borrow against the working line of credit? Why do we borrow against the working line of credit? These are all things that can be part of your communications program. If we could drop down to slide 9, and I'm wrapping up here pretty quickly because I see we're getting to the end of 45 minutes here, Chris, but if we could drop down to the last slide.
Okay.
On complexity. The other thing I think employees need to understand, and this is a critical piece of communications, is to understand that the ESOP differs from the 401k plan. The 401k plan, you put your own money in, maybe the company puts matching contributions in, they get invested in liquid, marketable securities, and if you leave the company, you can take that with you, and it's fairly easy to transfer. The ESOP creates a long-term benefit. It's not liquid. The only way you get liquid is if the company makes a market for the company stock, unless you're a publicly traded company. And that typically that making a market for the stock doesn't occur the instant that you leave the company. There's probably a wait time until after you start receiving the benefit. And then once you start receiving it, there's probably an additional 5 or 6 years over which it's distributed. I think that communication is really critical to help employees understand how the ESOP plan relates to the company's strategic business plan. Also, I think we can communicate that in the form of an ESOP distribution policy and/or a diversification policy so that employees really understand the nits and nats of ESOP distributions and diversification elections. Chris, I think I'll leave it at that, and I'm certainly glad to answer any other questions. I do appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation for the center's members today, Chris.
Well, we appreciate having you here, David. One of the things that, I'm going to go back to slide, I think it's 8 on yours, it's 9 on ours, on mine here, where it's the communication of the reality of ESOP payments. And it gets back to the topic you had here on 10. A lot of ESOP participants they don't quite understand why they have to wait so long for their money. They think they should be able to get paid out immediately. It's their money. It belongs to them. And I think if you communicate it properly to where, this company's trying to, the ESOP is a benefit for all the participants, not just you. And they have to maintain good cash flow and proper business finances. And if you explain, I found it very effective that if you explain that if we had to pay off everybody immediately the full sum of what they were owed, that it could very well bankrupt the company. And by the way, you may not get all of your money then either, or the next person. I think, all these things, all these issues that ESOPs potentially have, I think, are just solved if we communicate a lot of the numbers behind why these decisions are made. It's not that the company doesn't want to give you your money. I mean, I found that the company likes to pay out people as fast as they can, but they just have to do it in a sound financial way. So I think just communicating these things to people makes a big difference.
It does. I think it's critical, Chris, and I don't think there should be anything that's verboten that isn't covered. You don't want to share individual salaries and individual ESOP distribution amounts, but the broadest of concepts about virtually every aspect of your business should be disclosed if you really want to achieve success in tying the ESOP communications program to driving the corporate business strategic goals. If people don't understand how it works, they're not going to be able to help you achieve success financially, and it's not going to grow the value of your business.
Exactly. Before we continue conversation, I'm going to put up I just put up the slide for David's contact info there. I'm going to leave that up there while we kind of close out the session here. I did want to say thanks to David again before I forget, but also, you can hit *7 on your phone right now if you'd like to come in and ask a question. I know that a few people have been sending in chat questions, so feel free to do that as well. David, what in your view is the biggest issue that you see in your client companies of aligning the ESOP plan with the business plan? Is there a single biggest issue, or I mean, you've kind of made the point throughout the whole conversation we've had today that there's no one size fits all. The problems you may be having may not be what someone else is having. Do you find that there's a single kind of maybe if there's not one, maybe two or three kind of big issues, something you can put on a card and carry in your pocket to keep your mind on it?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question, and I don't know. I think there are two or three. I think one is that I see that employees, there's not a real understanding of the fact that an ESOP is an illiquid benefit and it may go up or down. There's almost like an understanding out there that I'm going to achieve success with my ESOP no matter what. It's going to be something that it only goes up, and I think trying to communicate that message and making people understand the reality of that it requires, it does require efforts by employees as a whole and certain economic circumstances to come together to create profits and value. I think that's one of the issues. I think also the other issue that I see that's really critical is some tangible form of incentive, Chris. If you don't have some, you can have the employee ownership and you can have all the communications in the world, but if you don't tie those efforts by the employees to some financial reward at the end of the day, I think you're going to fail in your ESOP communications efforts. It's got to be tied to some reward. It's why people, work hard in a capitalist country. People work hard because they make money by doing so. And if you don't tie the financial incentive to the efforts and the people, the folks who create those efforts and the profits of the business don't understand how the profits were created and why they got that value, I think your program is again not going to be as successful as it would be if you spent the time communicating like that. The last one, Chris, I would say, if let's say I'm the founder of the business and I've created this great ESOP-owned company, if I don't have my management behind the program, let's say that management doesn't really get or understand the ESOP, and so I've implemented an ESOP and I've got a great ESOP communications program, but the upper management of the company that I've hired to help transition this business from myself to the employees through an ESOP don't really support the employee ownership, I think that's another issue, Chris. I think those are some challenges that you need to get over. And I think we've talked about a couple others, just the basics of the program. Don't try to bite off too much at the outset. Try to make the message simple, make the message understandable. Don't make it too complex or too complicated. Walk before you run, and then again, tie the communications efforts to some tangible form of reward. I think that's, that might be more than two or three, Chris, but that's a few.
No, that's great, and I think that all of those reinforce the full scope of the presentation today. And it's I agree 100% with those. I think one of the things we always try to impress on companies is you shouldn't be communicating just solely for the sake of communicating. You should be trying to communicate the business case, how the ESOP fits with the business, why we're doing this, not just because we want to be happy people. We're doing this because if we want to fully take advantage of the ESOP benefit, then how does that relate to how we operate it as a business and as owners? So I think that's exactly right on point. So I thank you for that. I'm going to do one last call for questions. We've got a few more minutes here. Do we have any additional questions from anybody? Hit *7 on your phone to unmute it and ask away, or send that chat. All right, super. Thanks again, David.
Chris,
Yes.
I have one for you. What kind
Okay.
of, I'll just ask you a quick question. What kind of support does the center generally provide in these employee ownership, other than webinars? Are there specific programs that people could attend other than these? Is there training? I mean, I think we probably have some at the annual conference, but do you have anything to say about that?
Sure. We have a number of different training programs. Obviously, the webinars that we do, that we probably run I'd say about 30 a year, 25, 30 a year on various topics. We also have a lot of events at our annual conference. We have the pre-conference events there. We also staff the employee owner retreat for the ESOP Association in Chicago every August. So that's a 2.5-day intensive non-managerial employee training program that we run for the ESOP Association. And, those components, we can certainly replicate that retreat on an individual company basis. We actually have a couple of those components as part of our one-day employee ownership workshops that we're running this year, one in the day before our conference, April 28th, and one in the fall of 2016 that we'll be running. And actually, Barry just came in with a comment and said we have attended seminars in the CEO, CFO roundtable. So yeah, we have a number of different programs. We usually have a communication roundtable at the conference as well to kind of get some information sharing stuff with the member companies and other employee-owned companies around the state and around the country. So yeah, one of the things that we do also, we partner with a couple of, we're part of Kent State University, and so we have certain areas of expertise, but in those areas that we may not be is primarily focused on, we actually partner with a couple private service providers. One is Workplace Development, Jim Beto and Kathy Ivancy here in Ohio. We've partnered with them on large-scale communication programs for individual companies, kind of stuff. So, yeah, we do quite a lot of different things, and I thank you, David, for giving me the opportunity to do this. I feel kind of blushing over here for talking about me so much.
No, I knew you had that, Chris, and I think it's important. I think us doing this in a vacuum without giving some reach out like that to show how people can follow up I think it's critical to have the follow-up, and this is just a start today. This gives people some ideas, then they need a place to follow through, and I think the center is a great place to do that, Chris.
Well, we appreciate that. One of the things we always encourage our network members to do is talk to one another. We put together a directory of the companies that are in our network, and we always encourage through mentorship or just communication, talk to each other, because I find David, you and I are kind of the experts, quote unquote, right? But where the rubber is meeting the road is in the individual companies, and the amount of experience that are in those companies and the leadership and all of those kind of things, I think is very valuable. So we always encourage our member companies to talk to one another and get together. And I find, the employee ownership community is so very willing to share information like that. So I think that's very valuable too.
Yeah, I think, Chris, coming to, for example, the annual conference and at the end of April and meeting, similarly situated executives and other employees from other ESOP companies, I think that's a great way to get good ideas about how to proceed.
For sure. And attending the other organization events, the ESOP Association chapter events and those kind of things too.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Chris, one other one I'll say, the Beister Institute, I think, has a certified employee owner program too in Southern California. Yeah,
actually, we have an agreement with them to offer some of their, because a lot of their programs are programs that we don't particularly offer, and so we actually have in the past had agreements with them for members of our network to get a discount on attending some of their events. the multi, like you say, the certified employee owner, the multi-day events that they do that are are a little bit different than what we do, but they're still very valuable. So yeah, Beister Institute is a great organization, and they're a great group of people over there. As a matter of fact, Martin Staubis from the Beister Institute is going to be presenting at a webinar coming up in May for us as well. So great group of people out there.
Martin's done a great job over the years, that's for sure.
Yep. We're right up against the witching hour, so to speak. Thank everyone for coming. Let you know that we are having our next webinar is on April 6th. It's Keys for a Successful Employee Ownership Culture. Jim Beto from Workplace Development, as I mentioned, is going to be presenting at that one. You've got the information up there for David. I encourage anyone who's got any questions about this, about the stuff we've covered today, to give David a call. Actually, David's going to be joining us again on May 11th for a session for another webinar on how the ESOP fits into your overall benefits package. Kind of related to what we're talking about here, but kind of going into a little more detail on another topic, on another area. So again, David, great to have you here. Really pleased you were able to come out and visit us as well as present at our webinar.
No, it was great. Thank you, Chris, very much. I enjoyed it.
Okay, again, we'll be sending out the information, a link to the recording of this to everyone who attended today, who signed up and registered. We'll be sending out the information about the studies. Contact David. The information is on the screen there. If you got questions, you can contact me as well at the Ohio Employee Ownership Center. And I think with that, I'm going to stop talking and wish everyone a great rest of the day. Thanks again, David.
Thank you, Chris. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.